My name is Margaret Hill, but most people at the office just call me Maggie. For nearly 3 decades, I was the steady hand behind the numbers at Solence Energy Group, a mid-sized power utility company based in Columbus, Ohio. Not flashy, not high profile, but essential like the power grids we kept running across 5 states. I started in 1994, back when we still used dot matrix printers and floppy disks. And I stayed through 3 mergers, 2 rebrandings, a handful of market crashes, and at least one CEO who thought he could run a utility company like a Silicon Valley startup. I wasn't interested in titles. I never climbed the ladder the aggressive way. My job was in corporate financial compliance, the team that verified internal audits, managed pension calculations, and ensured the company didn't accidentally land itself in hot water with the IRS. I was good at it, quietly good. I never missed a deadline, never played politics, never gave anyone a reason to question my integrity. And for 29 years and 359 days, that was enough. The company had a generous retirement program, a legacy benefit grandfathered in from the early 2000s. If you made it to 30 years of service, you'd receive a full pension plus a stock matching package and extended health coverage for life. It was the kind of benefit most companies had phased out years ago. I'd watch others hit their 30-year mark and walk out with pride and financial security. I was 6 workdays away from mine. Then everything started to change. It began subtly. My weekly project updates were rerouted to a different team. I was told to start transitioning my reports just in case of future restructuring. The new department head, Kyle Madison, 37, shiny MBA. Fast talking, charm on demand, began holding closed door meetings I was no longer invited to. Kyle had joined less than a year ago. Rumor had it he was brought in to modernize the operation. A few people said he was close to someone on the board. I didn't care. I wasn't competing with him. I was on my way out retiring in less than a week. Why rock the boat? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Then came the coffee room whispers. Did you hear about Leonard in legal? Walked out with a box last Friday right before his 25-year bonus kicked in. HR's cleaning house. Quiet layoffs. Targeting high-salaried seniors. Cost optimization. They're calling it. I brushed it off. I had a signed agreement from HR outlining my retirement terms, and I was literally days away from fulfilling my contract. Who would be cruel or careless enough to mess with that? I kept my head down, focused on finishing strong, even started drafting my farewell email, thanking coworkers for the journey, already imagining the first morning I'd sleep past 6 a.m. But I should have known. In corporate America, loyalty only goes one way. I had no idea that my 3 decades of service were about to be erased with one closed door meeting, and the next 6 days would become a war I never planned to fight. The first real sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 business days before my official retirement date. I logged into my system as usual, coffee in hand, ready to review the quarterly pension distribution forecast. But instead of seeing the shared drive I'd used for over a decade, I was greeted with a red notification. Access restricted. Contact your administrator. That had never happened before. I wasn't just a user, I was the administrator for that folder. I sent a polite email to it. The response was fast and unusually formal. Access privileges to legacy accounts have been temporarily migrated during department level restructuring. Temporarily migrated is corporate speak for you've been locked out. Still, I tried not to panic. I told myself it was just part of Kyle's initiative to digitize operations or whatever jargon he'd used in last week's email blast. But then I noticed other changes. My name had been quietly removed from the weekly cross-departmental finance call. A report I usually reviewed before submission had already been sent by someone on Kyle's new team. And when I asked my colleague Angela about it, she gave me a look that said, I wish I could tell you something helpful, but I can't. That afternoon, Kyle walked past my desk without making eye contact. Not that I needed confirmation, but that sealed it. He knew something was coming, and he didn't have the guts to say it out loud. The real punch came the next day. HR sent me a meeting invite, end of employment transition discussion. I stared at the subject line, rereading it 4 times. End of employment, not retirement planning, not exit benefits review. It just ended. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning, Thursday, 4 business days before my 30-year anniversary. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours digging through my files, rechecking my contract, my signed retirement letter, even the company's own employee handbook. The rules were clear. If you were employed on your 30-year date, the benefits were automatic and binding. I was still employed, at least I was for now. I came into the office early the next morning, heart pounding. My hands shook when I typed in my security code. The scanner beeped, the door unlocked. But I knew this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding. It was a setup. And by the time I walked into that HR conference room, I was no longer afraid. I was angry. What they didn't know was that I hadn't spent 30 years just crunching numbers. I knew exactly where to find the kind of data that could destroy people like Kyle. The HR conference room was warm, too warm, like it had been designed to lull people into complacency. The lights were soft. The table was polished. A pitcher of water and 2 small glasses sat in the center, as if this were going to be a civilized conversation. Kyle was already there, seated across from Aaron, the HR director. He didn't stand when I entered. He didn't smile either. "Thanks for coming in, Maggie," Aaron said, folding her hands neatly over a printed folder with my name on it. "We just want to talk through next steps and make sure you have clarity moving forward." I stayed silent. Kyle jumped in. "This isn't personal. It's part of a broader realignment we're initiating across departments. The company's shifting priorities, and unfortunately, some roles are being sunset. Sunset. They always use words like that. Soft, harmless, sterile. I'm 4 days away from my 30-year anniversary." I said, my voice even. "That date triggers my pension package. This," I gestured at the folder, "isn't restructuring. It's avoidance." Kyle blinked, just once. "But it was enough." "I understand this is difficult," Aaron said, gently, "but your retirement benefits were contingent on active employment status through the eligibility date. Since your position is being eliminated before that." "It's not being eliminated," I cut in. "You've already reassigned my responsibilities to a junior associate. That's not a sunset. That's a swap." There was a pause, the kind of pause that confirms everything. Aaron slid the folder toward me. Inside, a predated termination agreement, a non-disclosure clause, and a waiver of claims form, all neatly printed and ready for signature. In exchange, they offered me a 3-month severance check. 3 months, in place of a lifetime pension, extended health coverage, and a loyalty bonus I'd earned by every definition of the word. Kyle leaned forward slightly, trying the reasonable guy routine. "We're willing to offer a smooth offboarding. Maggie, we'd appreciate your cooperation in making this transition clean for everyone involved." I looked at him then, not as a boss, not even as a colleague, but as what he really was, a kid who thought he was playing a smart game with other people's lives. And I realized something. He didn't think I would fight. He thought I'd go home, cry about it, maybe post a sad Facebook update about corporate betrayal, and then disappear. They all did. I took the folder, placed it gently in my bag, and stood. "I'm not signing anything," I said, "and I suggest you don't assume this meeting never happened." Kyle frowned. "Maggie, let's not escalate this." "Oh, I won't," I said, calmly, "but someone will." I walked out without another word. Back at my desk, I opened a private folder I hadn't touched in years. It was where I stored internal audits, policy changes, backdated HR memos, things no one paid attention to unless they had to. And now I had to, because if they wanted to erase 30 years of my life just to save a spreadsheet, I was going to make them answer for every single cell in it. And the deeper I dug into their decision, the more I realized this wasn't just corporate cruelty, it was a calculated pattern. And I wasn't the first one they tried to cut loose early. The thing about working in corporate finance for 30 years is you learn where the paper trails start. And more importantly, you learn where people try to make them disappear. The folder I opened that evening wasn't anything official, just a collection of old downloads, internal policy memos, and saved emails from across the years. But I'd always had a habit of keeping things, especially when they didn't feel quite right. At the top of the pile, an old email thread from 6 months ago. It was from a meeting where Kyle had first introduced himself to the senior operations team. His opening speech had seemed harmless at the time, streamlining workflows, digitizing legacy systems, evaluating role efficiency. But one phrase stood out now like a red warning light: modernizing cost structures related to long term benefit obligations. I ran a search through the internal email archive, what remained of my limited access over the past 10 months. That phrase or slight variations of it kept popping up in Kyle's communications with finance, HR, and legal. And that wasn't all. In one internal slide deck, clearly not meant for public eyes, there was a graph titled Projected Cost Avoidance, Pension Linked Terminations. Underneath, a list of projected savings by reducing full retirement triggered payouts. The figures weren't named, but the structure was obvious. Eliminate employees before they hit eligibility, and you save the company 6 to 7 figures per head. There were dates, job codes, anonymous identifiers, but I recognized the pattern. Leonard, from legal, terminated 2 weeks before his 25-year milestone. Angela's old boss let go just days before final stock vesting. Another name I hadn't thought about in years. Janice from procurement, gone at 19 years. 11 months. All of them had been listed under legacy benefit plans. This wasn't corporate downsizing, it was systematic benefit evasion. And it was happening under Kyle's watch, possibly even because of Kyle. My guess, he'd sold the board on this quiet savings model to look like a genius at budget control. But if that was true, it meant the entire strategy relied on one thing: silence. If no one fought back, no one investigated. If they framed it as performance issues, natural attrition, or role redundancy, no red flags got raised. The money stayed in the company. And Kyle's career kept rising. And I realized something chilling. This plan had probably worked before. At other companies, Kyle didn't invent this playbook. He was just good at running it. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. This wasn't about my pension anymore. It wasn't about a number on a benefit sheet. It was about principle, because if they could do this to me with a pristine record, decades of service, and a signed retirement agreement, then what chance did someone newer, younger, or less informed have? I started printing internal memos, redacted policy documents, emails with vague justifications, even the cost avoidance graph. I flagged everything that showed a pattern: dates, terminations, HR script similarities. And then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Denise Harding, a former colleague who left Solence after being restructured herself. At the time, I thought she'd just been a casualty of budget cuts. Now, I wasn't so sure. She picked up on the second ring. Maggie. Wow. I didn't expect her. You okay? No, I said, but I think I know what they did to you. And I need to ask you something important. Anything. Did they fire you just before your 5-year stock bonus vested? There was silence. Then a shaky breath. How did you know? And just like that, I knew I had more than a theory. I had a pattern. I had names. And now I had witnesses. The question wasn't whether I could expose this. It was who I could trust to help me bring the whole damn thing down. It didn't take long for the walls to start pressing in. 3 days after my meeting with HR, I received a certified letter at home. It was wrapped in neutral legalese, but crystal clear in intent. This is a formal reminder that any dissemination of internal company data, past or present, is a violation of your signed non-disclosure agreement and may constitute grounds for legal action. No signature, just the return address of Solance's in-house counsel. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a warning shot. They knew I was digging. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached back out to Denise Harding. She'd kept her termination documents, including emails from HR and a vague thank you for your service letter dated 3 days before her equity vesting date. After seeing what I had uncovered, she agreed to let me use her case as a supporting example on the condition that I kept her identity private, at least for now. She wasn't the only one. I began reaching out quietly, methodically, to former employees I remembered being let go unexpectedly. A few were skeptical. A few didn't want to get involved. But 2 more gave me what I needed: similar stories, nearly identical timelines, and most importantly, documents. One even had an old voicemail from Kyle, thanking them for making this transition smooth. Every piece added weight to the case I was building, but the pressure wasn't just legal. The next week, my email login was revoked entirely, even though I was technically still in transition and owed a final exit consultation. I received a terse message from IT saying, "Your separation is considered complete. All internal access has been disabled." Then my LinkedIn profile started getting unusual traffic anonymous views, mostly from accounts with no photos or job titles. And then came the phone call. Block number, middle of the afternoon. I picked up a male voice, calm and clipped. "You've made your point, but this won't end the way you think. Walk away while you can." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there, heart pounding. It wasn't just about damage control anymore. Someone was scared, and that meant I had leverage. That night, I contacted an attorney, not just any lawyer, Cheryl Mendez, a specialist in employee protections and pension fraud litigation. She'd made a name for herself in a case against a pharmaceutical firm that tried to dodge legacy retirement payments by shifting employees to shell roles. I showed her everything: the emails, the graph, the list of early terminations, the NDA, the phone call. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back, steepling her fingers. "This isn't just a wrongful termination," she said. "This is deliberate pension evasion. If you're willing to go public, we can turn this into something they can't sweep under the rug." I didn't answer immediately. Going public meant exposure, attention, pressure, my name in headlines, my face on screens. But staying quiet, that meant letting Kyle win. Letting the board pat him on the back for balancing the books on the backs of people like me. I looked her in the eye and nodded. "Let's do it." We filed a formal notice of legal intent that same week. It outlined the alleged violations of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, patterns of bad faith terminations, and use of NDAs to silence benefit-related disputes. We didn't file it quietly. We sent copies to the Department of Labor, the State Attorney General's office, and 3 major news outlets. Then we waited. And while the company scrambled behind the scenes, I prepared for what was coming next, because they tried to lock me out of my future. But I was about to unlock a closet full of corporate skeletons they'd been hiding for years. It started with a single article. The Cleveland Business Ledger ran a short expose under the headline, "Whistleblower Alleges Pension Evasion Scheme at Ohio-based Energy Firm." My name wasn't mentioned, but the facts were unmistakable. A longtime financial compliance employee, terminated days before retirement eligibility, and backed by documented evidence of targeted cost cutting within 48 hours. 3 more outlets picked up the story. Then came Bloomberg, Fortune, and a flurry of LinkedIn posts from employment lawyers and labor activists. Suddenly, Solent's Energy Group wasn't just a regional power company, it was a national talking point. And inside those glass office towers in Columbus, I knew they were panicking. The first sign, Solent's official social media accounts went silent. No morning updates, no employee spotlight posts, nothing. The second, Kyle's name quietly disappeared from the leadership page on the company's website. But the real collapse began when Senator Elaine Warren, a longtime advocate for worker protections, tweeted this: "Terminating employees days before their pensions vest isn't restructuring, it's theft. If these allegations are true, Solent's executives must be held accountable." Within hours, my attorney's office was flooded with press requests. I declined them all until one came through from 60 Minutes. That interview was the moment everything shifted. I sat down under studio lights, across from a seasoned journalist who didn't need drama to make the truth land. I told my story plainly: the dates, the documents, the pattern, and the fact that I was only one of many. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I spoke like the professional I'd always been. And that was what made it hit hardest. By the end of the segment, I was no longer a disgruntled former employee. I was the woman they tried to erase after 30 years of service. Solent's issued a corporate statement that same night. "We are conducting an internal review of our employment practices and take these allegations seriously. We remain committed to the highest standards of integrity." Corporate speak for "we're in deep trouble and we know it." The next morning, Two new developments landed in my inbox. A formal investigation was opened by the Department of Labor. A group of former Solence employees, five of them, contacted my attorney asking to join the case. And then, as if someone in the company finally realized the walls were crumbling, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Subject line: confidential. Proposal for resolution. It came from the CEO's executive assistant. I opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation to speak privately with the board of directors. They weren't trying to defend Kyle anymore. They were trying to negotiate and bury the fallout before it reached federal court. But I wasn't here to settle quietly. Not until they paid for what they took from me and from everyone they thought couldn't fight back. The board meeting wasn't held at the office. Instead, I was driven by a private car to a sleek, glass-walled conference center just outside Columbus. Neutral ground. No company logos. No press. My attorney, Cheryl, walked beside me, calm, focused. I could tell she'd done this before. Inside the boardroom sat 7 people, all older, all polished, all looking at me like I was both the problem and the solution. The CEO, Thomas Bright, rose to greet us. His handshake was firm, rehearsed, a PR-trained gesture. "We appreciate you taking the time." "See, Hill," he said, "we want to resolve this in a way that honors your service and protects the company's future." Translation: let's fix this before it gets worse. They slid a packet across the table. It was a settlement offer. Full reinstatement of pension and retirement benefits, a $250, 000 legacy contribution bonus, a non-disclosure agreement, and most telling, an added clause barring me from future public interviews about the case. It was generous, strategic, and clearly written to close the book. I flipped through the pages silently, then looked up. "You want this to go away quietly?" The board chair smiled. "We believe this is a fair resolution." I looked at Cheryl. She gave me a small nod. It was my call. I closed the packet. "I'm not here for a check," I said. "I'm here for accountability. I want 3 things added to this offer." Thomas folded his hands. "We're listening." 1, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, not vague language. A real apology for me and every other employee you've cut short. He frowned, but nodded slowly. 2, a company-funded, independent audit of all terminations tied to retirement-linked benefits in the last 10 years. There were murmurs now. Good. And 3, I want my name cleared. Publicly, I want Solence to state in writing that my termination was not performance-related and that I left the company in good standing. The room was quiet. Thomas Bright glanced at his general counsel, then back at me. "We'll review," he said carefully. I stood. "Take your time. But just so we're clear, if I don't get those 3 things, I'm not signing a thing." And the next headline won't be about a quiet resolution. It'll be about a board that tried to buy silence instead of fixing a broken system. Because I didn't come all this way just to get what was mine. I came to make sure this never happened to anyone else again. It took them 6 days to respond. 6 days of radio silence, news cycles, and mounting pressure from labor advocates. My story had become a symbol, one that couldn't be cleaned up with a PR statement or buried under legal boilerplate. Then at 12 a.m. on a Monday morning, the email came. Subjects: agreement revised per terms. Attached: a new settlement packet. My terms, all 3 were included. A signed public letter of apology from the board acknowledging my wrongful termination and its impact. A full-scale independent audit into the company's pension-linked layoffs, to be conducted by a third-party firm and reviewed by a state labor commission. A formal reinstatement of my employment record, updated to reflect completion of 30 years of service and eligibility for full retirement benefits. There was no attempt to water it down. No tricks in the fine print. They knew they couldn't afford another misstep. I signed it without hesitation, and that was that. The next week, Solence Energy Group released the apology on their website and in the Columbus Dispatch. They called what happened a failure of oversight and pledged to review their internal policies to ensure it never happens again. Kyle Madison resigned to pursue other opportunities. No farewell email, no corporate send off. I didn't celebrate, but I did sit down one evening on my back porch with a glass of wine, open my laptop, and quietly watch the public acknowledgement scroll across the screen. Margaret Hill, 30 years of service, retired in good standing. That sentence meant more than any settlement check ever could. I'd earned my retirement. I'd earned every damn day of it. But more than that, I'd exposed a rot that had spread quietly, invisibly, for years. And I'd made sure the next employee standing at the edge of retirement wouldn't have to wonder if the rug would be pulled out from under them. Because now they'd think twice. Because now someone had fought back and won. I didn't just protect my pension, I rewrote the rules of how they could take it away. People like to say loyalty is a virtue, but in corporate America, loyalty is often a one-way contract. They expect you to give everything your time, your health, and your silence. And in return, they offer conditional respect. Respect that evaporates the moment you become inconvenient to the bottom line. I learned that the hard way. But I also learned something else. The system only works as long as everyone plays along. As long as we believe that keeping quiet protects us. As long as we believe that standing up will cost more than it's worth. I stood up, and while it did cost me time, peace, and comfort, it gave me something greater, clarity. Clarity that no one should have to beg for what they've earned. Clarity that silence never protects the right people. Clarity that even after 30 years of service, your voice is still your sharpest tool. I didn't want to become a whistleblower. I wanted to retire quietly, send a few thank you emails, maybe take a trip to the Grand Canyon. But when they tried to erase everything I built, they gave me no choice. So I gave them the one thing they never expected, a fight. And I didn't just fight for myself. I fought for Denise, for Leonard, for the people they let go 2 weeks too early, for the ones who couldn't afford a lawyer or didn't keep the email receipts, for every worker who thought keeping their head down would be enough. Let this be a reminder. Sometimes keeping your head down is exactly how they get away with it. And sometimes standing up once loudly, clearly, is how you make sure they never forget your name. Margaret Hill, 30 years, fully retired, still watching.